Well, like you and I know that we're gonna be together for the rest of our lives.
So this is love.
I tried calling her. She,
When you have money, that's when she spreads her legs. Yeah, walk away because you're a little girl. You need to grow up.
You don't know anything.
I feel like he's suffering. I'm not gonna let Anfisa destroy him.
So you're basically saying that you're just dating me because I can buy you things.
Yes.
She keyed idiot into the driver's side door. She broke phones, plural. I'm not gonna screw myself over just because you want to be happy.
Reality TV has given us a lot of couples over the years, but every now and then, a couple shows up that escapes the limits of the show they came from. And whether they want to or not, they become the standard for every chaotic couple that comes after them. George and Anfisa were that couple. He was a 27-year-old cannabis dealer from Riverside who told a beautiful Russian woman he was a millionaire and then had to figure out what to do once she arrived expecting millionaire behavior. She, on the other hand, was a 20-year-old from Moscow who told him directly, repeatedly, and with almost concerning levels of honesty that she was there for money. And somehow everyone called her the villain.
I think it's the most important thing in a relationship.
Money.
Now, before we go any further, Anfisa told George she wanted $10,000 a month before she got on the plane. She told him she would leave if he lost his money. She told him exactly what the relationship was built on, meaning there was no manipulation, no pretending otherwise, just brutal honesty delivered with the emotional warmth of a tax audit. And he thought she was joking.
Money?
I said laugh. Are you deaf?
She was not joking. And that gap right there between what Anfisa openly said and what George emotionally translated it into is the most important thing in this entire story, because this is not just about a screaming Russian woman and a cannabis dealer who lied so hard he accidentally imported his own consequences. This is about who we decided was the villain before we had all the information, and what happened to both of them when the show stopped. So who actually was the gold digger? Who was actually the liar? And why did everyone spend years blaming the only person in the relationship who was saying the quiet part out loud?
Things for me.
I'm not gonna screw myself over just because you want to be happy.
Before what happened on camera, you need to fully grab what happened before it, because both of these people arrived on 90 Day Fiancé with histories the show only partially told.
Meet George.
I'm an entrepreneur in the medical marijuana industry, growing and providing medicine to patients.
George Nava was born in January 1990 in Riverside, California. His family line runs through Mexico on his parents' side and Spain on his grandparents' side. He moved out at 18 and stepped into the cannabis industry during a period when it was sitting in a legal gray zone. California was in a complicated legal period with marijuana at the time. Cultivation laws were shifting, and a man willing to operate in the gray areas could make decent money if he was careful. But George was not always careful.
I have a criminal background. I told you that I work in the medical marijuana industry. When I started, it wasn't as legal.
Before Anfisa 90 Day Fiancé, George already had a felony conviction for cannabis cultivation at 21. That alone shaped everything that came after it. It locked him out of standard apartment leasing, forced him into hotels and temporary living situations, and became the reason he was still floating between places when Anfisa arrived in the United States. He kept that part of his life quiet for weeks because it immediately collapsed the version of himself he had been presenting.
And I haven't been completely honest with Anfisa as to why I haven't been able to get the apartment.
But the felony was only part of what George was hiding. The bigger thing that would take an entire season to fully unravel was his actual financial situation, because George did not have the money the way he said he had the money. George was not broke in a simple way. He was operating in a space where confidence often ran ahead of actual liquidity. He spoke about his business like the next tier of success was just around the corner, even when the current version of his life still depended on moving carefully through unstable ground. By the time Anfisa landed in America, he had already spent roughly $70,000 trying to maintain an image that required constant upkeep to survive contact with reality.
Maybe I exaggerated it a little bit to Anfisa about how much money I had, but I spent everything I had trying to impress her.
Everything he had went into performance, trying to keep a version of himself alive long enough for it to become real. And it still was not enough, because Anfisa noticed immediately. Now, Anfisa.
I'm Anfisa. I'm 20 years old. I'm from Moscow, Russia.
Anfisa Arkipchenko, born September 1995, Moscow, Russia. Her father died when she was 9 after being hit by a car. Her mother drifted in and out of her life, focused more on relationships than parenting, so most of Anfisa's childhood was spent with her grandmother. By 10, she was already learning English with a private tutor. Later, she studied linguistics at university before eventually leaving Russia without finishing the degree. She was 20 years old when she entered the show, and unlike George, who kept introducing new information every few episodes like a man opening surprise bills, Anfisa was unusually direct about who she was and what she expected.
If I was ugly and fat, would you be dating me?
Questions like that were not emotional traps. They were blunt observations disguised as conversation. Anfisa looked at the relationship exactly as it was, stripped the romance language off it, and said the uncomfortable part out loud while George kept trying to dress it back up again, because the truth was obvious to both of them. George wanted the fantasy, the beautiful Russian girlfriend, the status symbol, the feeling of being the kind of man who could attract someone like Anfisa. And Anfisa wanted the arrangement exactly as it had been presented to her, the money, the lifestyle, and the version of George had introduced online before reality started leaking through the cracks. Both of them understood the exchange from the beginning. The difference was that Anfisa kept saying it out loud while George kept acting surprised every time she did.
I have this, I guess I would say, weird sense of humor. I'm very sarcastic and I like deadpan jokes, so I feel like it didn't translate very well to some people. And to me, it was fun saying things that are kind of extravagant and, you know, play up this common stereotype that a lot of people have about Russian women.
By the time this season aired, the roles had already been assigned. George was the overwhelmed nice guy trying his best. Anfisa was the cold Russian gold digger draining him dry. And the uncomfortable part is that both of them, intentionally or not, gave the show exactly enough material to build those characters convincingly. Before any of that, there was the question of how they actually found each other. The show said Facebook. George also said Facebook, except a YouTuber later surfaced claiming George had actually met Anfisa on a campsite. However, George denied it. Anfisa never confirmed it publicly, but the claim never fully went away either. And when you look at how quickly the dynamic between them calcified into something that looked more like a financial arrangement than a courtship, the Facebook story starts to feel like the Tiger version of something messier. What we know for certain is this: George saw her picture, messaged her. She didn't respond. He tried again, said something that finally got her attention, and eventually flew out to meet her in Spain, where she was traveling with classmates. He took her to Barcelona, then Paris, then Italy, then the Canary Islands, spent nothing less than $70,000 across multiple trips and gifts before she even boarded a plane to come to America.
How much do you think you spent on her?
About $70,000.
And Anfisa, for her part, had already told him what the arrangement required. She asked for a $10,000 Chanel bag before the K-1 visa application was even filed. He said no, and she went silent. Then, without explanation, she called and said she was coming anyway. Nobody fully explained that pivot. Not on camera, not even after. What it suggested was that both of them had already done their own private calculations and decided, for their own separate reasons, that this was worth attempting. He wanted the image. She wanted the opportunity. And somewhere in that overlap, they decided to call it a relationship and see how far it would go. So Anfisa landed in America, and George immediately started performing stability. The nice car, the confident smile, the calm explanations. He drove her to a hotel instead of an apartment and talked around it like the missing apartment was some temporary inconvenience instead of a direct consequence of the felony he hadn't told her about yet. Because with George, the truth was always arriving a few scenes late. The explanation came later. The financial problems came later. The criminal record came later. Every important detail in this relationship seemed to appear only after Anfisa was already standing in the middle of it. And Anfisa noticed almost immediately, because the math was already looking strange before she'd even unpacked her suitcase. This was a man who had presented himself online like a millionaire, promised luxury and a specific kind of lifestyle, and was now explaining why his fiancé was living out of a hotel room. That tends to raise questions, especially when she'd already tested the situation before getting on the plane. She'd asked for a $10,000 Chanel bag before coming to America, got told no, and boarded the flight anyway, which says a lot, honestly, because by that point, some part of her had already understood the money probably wasn't as endless as George had claimed. She came anyway, maybe because she thought the reality was still close enough to what she'd been promised, maybe because she wanted to see for herself exactly how exaggerated the image had been, or maybe because once you've already built the fantasy in your head, you keep hoping the cracks you're noticing aren't structural yet.
Which we will get to.
I didn't think you would ever find out.
That line wasn't just about the felony. It described the entire relationship. George had built a version of himself that only worked from a distance, because once Anfisa arrived, that version started collapsing really fast before everyone's eyes. Apartment missing, money not adding up, stories changing shape depending on the question, and George kept adjusting instead of correcting.
There has to be a limit. At least an allowance.
10,000 per month?
He nervous laughed his way through every conversation about money because nervous laughter bought him a few extra seconds before reality had entered the room. The reality being that the version of life he sold Anfisa online and the version he could actually maintain in real life had stopped matching a long time ago, and the gap between those two versions kept getting wider the longer she stayed in America. Instead of admitting that, George kept spending like momentum itself was going to save him, keep the image alive long enough, and maybe the truth would somehow arrive later and catch up to it. It did not. And by this point, the financial pressure was starting to show through the cracks in almost every scene. One of the funniest examples happened during ring shopping, because the entire scene felt like two completely different realities trying to exist in the same jewelry store. George spent the entire time mentally wrestling his bank account, trying to steer the conversation toward rings that existed somewhere within the borders of what he could survive financially. Meanwhile, Anfisa looked genuinely confused by the limitation itself, not even in a cartoon villain way, more like somebody trying to understand why a person would promise luxury with this much confidence and then suddenly act shocked when luxury started costing luxury prices. The exact same energy followed them into dress shopping. And just so you know, this was all Beverly Hills shopping, not a regular boutique. And somehow George still walked in hoping the numbers would magically become manageable once they reached the price tags. Well, they did not.
Why? What is your most expensive dress?
Our most expensive dress would be $45,000.
A $45,000 dress. I'm worried that Anfisa's not gonna be happy till she gets it. I hope she don't like it.
The thing is, the show edited the scene like a straight-line confirmation of everything viewers already believed about Anfisa. Anfisa walks in, asks for the most expensive option, proves the point the audience has already been set up to believe about her. But Anfisa addressed that scene herself years later. According to her, the question about the most expensive dress was curiosity, not demand. The dress itself was not even the one she wanted.
He says that he initially saw a picture of her online and fell in love with, her mind. He says that he initially tried to send her a couple of messages on Facebook, but she didn't respond. So he tried to say something funny, and it actually got her attention. And he ended up flying out to meet her.
We've gone to Barcelona, Paris, France, Italy. Our last trip was to the Canary Islands.
After only spending about a month total in person, George is ready to go to Russia to bring Anfisa to the US on the K-1 visa. They always introduce these stories.
Production pushed for the shot because the story worked better if she looked like she entered the boutique hunting for the highest number in the building. And honestly, by that point, the show already knew exactly which version of Anfisa it preferred.
That's a lot of money for one day.
Survey says...
Do you like her, my love?
What do you think?
Yeah, it's not gonna happen today.
Uh-oh.
But the further the relationship went, the harder it became to keep pretending the problems between them were only about money, because eventually the arguments started sounding exhausted. And once that shift happened, the show finally got the footage it would become famous for. Now let's get into what was probably the most infamous moment in their entire relationship, the garage phone call. This scene got clipped, reposted, memed, and passed around the internet so many times that it eventually started feeling like internet folklore. But the actual sequence matters here. George told Anfisa he was going downstairs to get something from the garage. Instead, he disappeared for over an hour to secretly meet with a lawyer about potential divorce proceedings without telling her where he was going. Meanwhile, Anfisa sat alone in California with no car, no money of her own, no legal stability yet, and no way to contact anyone except George, who had just vanished without explanation. And that reaction became the entire story. Not the disappearance, lawyer meeting, or the lying, just that screaming that seems like it's coming from a controlling psycho. That was the version the show locked onto. But that framing only works if you cut the sequence in half and keep only the loudest part. Years later, Anfisa explained the scene herself.
And he told me he was going to the parking garage for like a few minutes to get something from the car. I don't think I even knew that the filming crew was there. So okay, he goes to the garage, 5 minutes passes, 10 minutes passes, 15 minutes passes, and he's still not back. So I'm like, okay, something's going on. And our relationship was already not going very well. We had a lot of arguments because previous part that I showed you, when I found out that things weren't really as he portrayed them to be. So I can say that for the first about a year, I wasn't feeling very great mentally. So that really stressed me out when he just left. And how do you do that to someone? How do you just leave without saying where you're going and disappearing for like a few hours? I don't think it's okay. Maybe, I shouldn't have screamed so much, but I definitely wasn't feeling very good.
Listening to it back years later, that panic starts sounding less theatrical and more of a serious situation, because underneath all the screaming was somebody describing total dependence. The screaming was not a good look, that part's true, but context changes the meaning of behavior. This was not somebody obsessively tracking her partner for fun. She was simply reacting to abandonment while trapped in a position where leaving was not simple. Anyway, after the little drama Anfisa displayed, he canceled the lawyer meeting, got back in the car, and went home, because calming the explosion in front of him felt easier than dealing with the reason it happened in the first place. And honestly, that became the rhythm of their entire relationship. The lie happened first, the reaction happened second, and somehow the reaction always became the bigger story. Which brings us to the scene most people remember more than almost anything else from this entire franchise.
Hey.
What?
Where are you going?
I'm going to get my wallet.
Bring me my red bag with my makeup.
If you watched 90 Day Fiancé at any point in the last decade, you already know this scene. It escaped the show completely and turned into one of those reality TV moments that became bigger than the series itself. Even Anfisa eventually leaned into it, which honestly made sense, because by that point the scene had outgrown the relationship itself. People who had never watched the show still knew the quote. But underneath the meme was the same issue that kept showing up everywhere else in their relationship. Drama followed every moment where reality interrupted the fantasy George had built around them, and production absolutely understood that, because once producers realize a couple's worst moments make addictive television, everything else starts getting trimmed around the explosions. The fights stay, and any quieter moments that complicates the narrative quietly disappears in editing. Which brings us to the car incident.
What? The keyed idiot into the driver's side door.
Now this one's harder to soften because there's no clever reinterpretation for scratching idiot into someone's car door. It was destructive, it was immature, and it was wrong. But even after moments like that, the relationship still kept moving forward. Not because the problems were getting resolved, but because both of them kept pushing past things that should have stopped everything much earlier. And eventually all that resentment, distrust, and constant fighting followed them into a place that was supposed to deal in logic: a lawyer's office. They thought the postnuptial agreement was a first mature thing they did in the relationship. Two people sitting down with legal paperwork and finally acknowledging the instability everyone else had already been watching for months. Instead, it turned into another disaster. And this is the part where the relationship started exposing something really disturbing underneath it. Anfisa hit him on camera in the middle of a legal meeting while production stood there filming the entire thing. But what made this scene even stranger was how quickly the show folded it back into the normal rhythm of the chaos. There was no moment where the tone shifted to acknowledge what viewers had just watched. It got packaged into the same cycle as the screaming. By that point, the dysfunction itself had become part of the entertainment, and underneath all of it, another problem had been getting worse the entire time: money.
I'm not a millionaire, I'm just trying to be honest with you. In fact, in all honesty, I am in a little debt.
Right after he said that, everything around them stopped looking like a romance that was still forming. The trips, the gifts, the constant spending, all of it started suddenly pointing towards something being held together by effort rather than reality. Because what he called a little debt was not new. It had been there before she arrived in America, before the wedding, and even before the promises had even finished stacking up.
Debt.
I didn't know that he's really in debt. It just means that he's been lying to me the entire time, and I feel like I can't trust him anymore.
And once she said that, her entire side of the story sharpened into something else. All the earlier conversations started coming back differently. The way he talked about money, the way the lifestyle was always just one step ahead of what was actually possible, the way everything was always soon or eventually, never now.
Maybe I exaggerated it a little bit to Anfisa about how much money I had, but I spent everything I had trying to impress her.
Everything he had went into maintaining the version of himself he had introduced at the beginning, keeping it going long enough for reality to catch up. But reality never caught up, it just exposed the gap. So by the time they ended up sitting across from lawyers, nothing there felt new anymore. It all felt like the same problem reaching its most formal point. That's where the focus shifted to debt. Who carries what? Who is responsible for what came before and what came after? However, Anfisa refused to take it on. She had not been part of it when it started, and now she was being asked to sign into it after the fact. And somewhere in that room, the story both of them had been living inside started splitting into two completely different versions. He saw her spending, while she saw something else entirely. One situation that was visible, another that had been hidden until it could no longer stay hidden.
We just came out of the USCIS and I got approved, and now I have my green card.
But then nothing mattered most in this story for Anfisa than the green card. George knew that the green card was the thing she needed that he had that she didn't have yet. Once she had it, the calculation changed. She was no longer dependent on the marriage for her legal right to be in the country. Whatever other reasons she had to stay, and there were some, even if they were complicated, the legal necessity was gone. It had been said before, but this time nothing about it sounded like something that could be brushed off anymore. Everything that came before eventually funnels into something heavier than arguments or money or perception. February 2018. Between filming their final season together on the tell-all, George drove an SUV packed with duffel bags toward the Arizona border. A traffic stop followed. A search followed that, then the hit. They found 297 pounds of cannabis, and George was sent to prison. That moment connected back to a pattern that had been sitting in his life long before cameras followed his relationship. A prior felony at 21, a business style built around fast cash, risk, and illegal work that did not start with Anfisa and did not wait for her to appear. Even while the relationship was being filmed, that world was still visible in the background.
You know, I basically was willing to do anything for love, even give up my freedom.
That sentence tries to turn the outcome into romance, a man sacrificing everything for love, but the story around it refuses that simplicity.
Last time I saw Anfisa was a day before I got incarcerated. The night before I came to prison, probably about 2 months after I was in prison, you know, she basically told me that she couldn't be with me anymore, and telling me that she wished that I got 12 years in prison.
That is not true. He went to prison in 2018, and I stopped talking to him in summer 2019, so that's definitely not 2 months. However,
technically legally married, but I ended up finding out through the internet that she was actually with somebody else.
That is true. I did start dating somebody else. However, I told George that I do not want to be with him. We weren't talking for a few months. Maybe he didn't get the memo, but I think as long as I told him, I'm free to date whoever I want.
By this point, the relationship is no longer active in any real sense. It exists as competing versions, each person reconstructing what happened from their own position after the fact.
It really broke my heart. Like, there's really no way for me to do anything from in here. Like, I couldn't call her because she blocked my calls, and it was just a mess.
He couldn't call because she had apparently blocked him, he said.
This is also not true. I did not block his calls. He did not call me after I told him that I didn't want to be with him.
Even absence becomes something they disagree on. Even silence has two explanations. He came out in May 2020 noticeably different, around 128 pounds lighter. People who only remembered him from television did not recognize him at first glance.
I'm stronger emotionally. I mean, I've gone through a lot of changes here in prison. I've changed a lot physically. Since I came to prison, I started working on my health and been able to lose about 128 pounds.
And the changes did not stop at the physical level. By 2022, George had moved into a different chapter entirely. A new marriage, 2 children, a more stable setup in California, where his work in cannabis existed in a legal framework rather than the underground version that once defined him.
Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? I'm George, and this is my beautiful girlfriend, Rhoda.
From the outside, it looked like a clean break from the version of him that once drove across state lines with almost 300 pounds of marijuana in the back of an SUV. Anfisa, on her part, after the divorce finalized in 2020, her direction had already been set in motion for years. Community college first, then transfer, then UC Irvine, a degree in business administration, self-funded the entire way through fitness work she built alongside her studies, and in 2022 she became a United States citizen. 6 years after entering the show as the gold digger narrative, she completed the process on her own terms. No relationship dependency, no televised storyline attached to it, just paperwork, time, and consistency. In 2021, Anfisa posted a video on her YouTube channel. She called it Reacting to My Old Episodes on 90 Day Fiancé, My Truth. And it was the most important thing she ever posted in connection to this story. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the opposite. She pulled up clips, went through them one by one, and explained what was real, what was edited, what she was actually thinking in the moments that had defined how viewers understood her for the preceding 5 years.
But I did ask her at one point, just out of curiosity, what was your most expensive dress? Just because, why not? I just want to know what is the most expensive dress. Just curious. That's it. Not because I wanted it, because I also explained that I wanted a dress that would like hug my curves really nice. And if you remember me trying on the most expensive dress, it was like a big whatever that wasn't even what I wanted. But then they made it look like that was the dress that I wanted. I didn't even let him work, but I hope now you guys can see what kind of work my ex-husband was doing. And in fact, I was being caring and trying to protect him from doing something illegal. He could have.
Anfisa admitted that the performance was partly a performance. She understood what made good television and gave it to them. Those eye rolls, the delivery, the lines that landed with maximum impact. She knew what she was doing. But here's the thing about playing up a character for cameras. You can play a character and still be a real person. The character Anfisa played was the gold digger, and George played a character too, the unlucky nice guy who loved too much and got taken advantage of by a beautiful Russian woman. The real George lied about his finances before she arrived, had a prior felony, spent $70,000 he didn't have, hid dead until after the wedding, drove nearly 300 pounds of drugs across the state line, and then framed it as an act of love. Both characters were performances, and both people were more complicated than the characters, but only one of them got the villain edit, while the other got the sympathetic one.
Still 2 years since I was on the show, people still talk about me, so I guess that's good.